My name is Chris Taggart. I'm the CEO and co-founder of OpenCorporates. We normally describe it as the largest open database of companies in the world. We collect official company information from about 140 different jurisdictions, and we have about 180 million different companies in our database, which is all freely available on the web. David, could you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Chris. I'm David Lewis. I'm the Executive Secretary of the Financial Action Task Force Secretariat, and we are the global watchdog for money laundering and terrorist financing.
Great. So, David, we're about to look into the future, what the future holds for anti-money laundering and financial crime. But maybe just let's help us situate it in the present. What does the international anti-money laundering regime look like today, and what is it? What assumptions is it predicated on?
Great question, and a good one to get started. So I won't go into a lot of detail, but I will say that the FATF standards, the global standards we set, have evolved over 30 years, and they've been responsive to both changes in the criminal threat and the terrorist threats, but also to the changes in technology and to the changes in businesses that we've seen over that time. What underpins them are a few basic principles: customer due diligence, knowing who your customers are, KYC as it's often known, ongoing monitoring, and then reporting suspicious activity. And reporting suspicious activity is difficult for businesses to do if they don't know who their customers are and they're not able to monitor their activity. And crucial to this, and to this conversation in particular, is knowing who ultimately owns companies and trusts, or in our language, legal arrangements and entities. So this is about the natural person, the man with the woman with arms and legs that is really behind companies and trusts. And the FATF standards created that requirement back in 2003, and we're still pushing ahead with it today. We're still finding difficulties getting there. Ultimately, though, it's about transparency. It's about financial transparency, protecting the financial system, and reducing the harm caused by crime and terrorism to people and societies. We need to know the people involved in transactions, the sender and receiver of funds. So those are the standards we have today, and those are the principles underpinning them.
Great. That's all really good. But one of the things that strikes me is it's predicated on this being around, to a certain extent, it arose from this idea of bricks and mortar of people, of briefcases full of cash, and the more modern equivalents of that. But when we're sort of talking about we're in fundamentally a data-driven, technology-driven world where the criminals are some of the best at adopting new technologies, whether it's virtual currencies or things like setting up company networks automatically, using new structures, using law cases, court cases and so on to transfer money and so on. When they're using incredibly imaginative, do you think the approach that there is today is fit for purpose, still fit for purpose, and certainly will it be fit for purpose in the next 5 or 10 years?
Well, I think it's important to say, first of all, that the FATF standards, the global standards, are technology neutral. That doesn't mean, however, that the FATF itself is technology silent. We have worked really hard, particularly in the last 5 to 10 years, to ensure that the standards are responsive to and understanding of technological developments. And right now, that's more important than ever, particularly in the pandemic, where we're seeing that, this conversation today, everything we do is enabled by technology, and criminals are responding to that and taking advantage of it more than anyone else. So it's absolutely essential that, although our standards are technology neutral, that we are not technology silent. We actually started looking at new technological developments, new payment products and services, virtual assets back in 2013, and that's when we issued our first guidance. And we've continued to develop the standards and the guidance since then, to the point where last year we issued the first ever global standards for virtual assets, growing out of the likes of Bitcoin, because we need to understand the risks and we need to enable countries to mitigate those risks. So technology provides huge opportunities. We are trying to be as aware of that as possible. also for the effectiveness of anti-money laundering measures, but it also presents risks. And where those risks can't be mitigated, then governments have to come in and put a restraint on technological development.
Great. And so I suppose the question, what sort of things are worrying you? You know, and when we saw, and when you look at something like Danske Bank, you're talking about over $200 billion in Danske Bank, and then there's Standard Chartered and Wachovia. Danske Bank was something like 2007 to 2013. You know, that money, either the criminals are no longer laundering money, or they found a different route, essentially. And I guess the question, you know, so I'm wondering about what is worrying you? Where do you think we're missing, you know, regulators, honest, good businesses, banks, you know, law enforcement? Where do you think they're missing the signals? Where do you think the criminals are laundering their money today?
Well, in many respects, money laundering hasn't changed that much. Most money is still laundered through cash, through the informal remittance sector, hawalas, often through charities. We do have a focus now on new technologies and how they enable money laundering. But the vast majority of money laundering and the huge volumes we see is probably still happening through traditional methods. That's something we mustn't lose sight of here. And it's easy to think, well, we have to throw the whole system out because there are these new developments, for example, in company formation. I guess the thing that worries me most is about effective implementation. And where we've seen these failures by banks and others, it reflects the fact that although we have standards today, comprehensive standards, and we have countries bought into those standards, they've passed laws and regulations, they've set up financial intelligence units, we're not seeing effective implementation. And so of some very basic principles. And a lot of that comes down to political will. A lot of that comes down to capacity and funding for law enforcement, for financial intelligence units, so they can invest in technology as well and use that technology to find the needle in the haystack, which is getting forever and ever bigger. But I have a question for you. What do you see as the developments that are changing, which will present the biggest risk to the current AML regime as you know it, particularly in the company formation space?
Yes, I mean, obviously we follow this space really closely. We're collecting this information not just every day, but every hour, every minute, and so on, and adding it to our database. And we're seeing a lot of the trends, and we're also speaking to company registers around the world around this sort of stuff. And I guess the thing that we've started to see, and where we're one of the things we're most concerned of, is programmatic company formation, and but generally, and we're seeing this with the pandemic crisis, in that the pace of change is becoming, is becoming much faster. And so you talked back then about, how most money laundering is done in cash. Now, cash, at least in the developed world, in the last 6 months, 9 months since the pandemic started, has almost disappeared. And so, I guess we're going to be seeing cashless money laundering, going to become a much greater share of it. But when we're seeing things like, well, here's a few examples. We are in the European Union and in many other countries already. You can create companies using APIs, using computers to create them. And once you can do that, the sky's the limit. It's akin to what happened with stock markets. I'm old enough to remember when stock markets had pits of people in funny colored jackets that were shouting at each other and used pieces of paper and telephones and so on to do transactions. And once you started having electronic trading, then there was an inevitable move, because to speed, to reduction in cost. And so, first it was algorithmic trading, then it was programmatic trading, that algorithmic trading splitting it up into smaller amounts, programmatic trading, responding to signals, and then you get high frequency trading, where trades are being done at milliseconds. And we see no reason why company formation won't be any different, because if you can get a benefit by using companies, and frankly, you can get a benefit from using companies. You know, we are seeing this. There's been a very significant rise in the number of UK companies formed in the pandemic. I'm really surprised that I really don't feel that that's going to be driven by a growth in the economy of a proportionate size. We're seeing in America, you know, things like speaking to secretaries of state over there, that stolen credit cards are being used to create a whole set of companies at a time. Now, their concern is that they're not getting the fees for those. But actually, my question is okay, so what is, if those are going to be discovered, those are going to be discovered probably within a month, maybe even within weeks. So what are those companies going to be used for in that meantime? So we're already seeing this happen, and we're seeing this accelerate. You know, at the moment it's signals. It's sort of like those first few drips of rain that you're getting before the shower starts. But we've seen how quickly, in the UK, for example, with VAT scams, carousel fraud and so on, just how quickly once a mechanism becomes available, just how quickly it takes off. And I think that this is, and just one other thing in terms of, we're seeing that as you said, a lot of money laundering is based on businesses, on banks, knowing who they're really doing business with. And that's becoming increasingly difficult, you know, and it's becoming increasingly difficult for a number of reasons. One is that the criminals are becoming better at this, and they're using longer networks. And again, you know, if you had to manually set up each company, if you had to, you know, once upon a time, to have a company in Turks and Caicos, you had to jump on a plane with a suitcase of cash and set it up out there. Now this is all done, you know, not even over the phone. It can be done electronically, and I think once you can do that, why not have a network? You know, that network that adds new entities every day. Why not have a network when you're reporting? If you're reporting beneficial ownership as a lagging indicator, you know, every 12 months or something like that, then why not change the beneficial ownership every month or every week or every day? You know, if you're having a company and you're reporting on a lagging indicator, then why not have companies that are being created for the day, for a minute, or for a second even? You know, and these things are not only possible when you speak to company registrars, they're thinking, I never thought of that sort of stuff before. And you know, and in a way it's good. You know, we want company registrars to be fine, upstanding people and not necessarily to think like criminals, but nevertheless, if we don't have someone within the organization that understands how criminals think, we'll be in difficulty. And together with this, what we're finding is that, you know, it is disproportionately easier to form a company than it is to find out information about that company. So just one example, in Germany, you know, if I'm potentially doing business with a company in Germany, you want to see who the directors are. Firstly, you know, their data is a mess. Frankly, the German data is a mess. But secondly, okay, I can see who this director is. What other companies is he a director of, or has he been a director of? You know, both for checking against sanctions lists, but also just in terms of, you know, are there any indicators there, suspicious indicators? Well, Germany doesn't allow you to search by director, and those sorts of things where they're putting barriers in place are these enormous vectors that give really give an opening, I think, to criminals. So
well, let me interrupt you there, because I'm conscious of the time, and you've raised so many interesting points there, and I find it fascinating, particularly the sort of analogy with the trading environment. Not many people know this, but I introduced the first web-based ticket entry system for equity sales traders working on IPOs back in the 90s. So I'm kind of torn because I'm excited by this technical innovation, and yet at the same time in my current job, I see the huge risks and the need sometimes to slow it down a little bit, to ensure that we don't open doors to criminals and terrorists. And I think we need to be careful that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. In particular on beneficial ownership, we've seen huge steps forward in the last few years. We've seen company registries established, public registries by the UK, the EU, even the Caribbean now. The UK overseas territories have committed to public registries. This is a revolution, but it's a revolution that reflects the way that business works today or even yesterday, not necessarily, as you say, how business is going to work tomorrow. And I guess that's our biggest concern. How do we ensure that the AML system is fit for purpose, not just for how we operate today or maybe 10 years ago, but how we're going to operate in 10 years' time? And I'll say, for the FATF's point of view, we're currently reviewing the standard on beneficial ownership, what we call Recommendation 24, and we'll look at how we can bring that up to date if necessary. But I think we need to go further. As you say, we need to look ahead, and maybe conversations like this need to involve more people, and we need to do this horizon scanning to make sure that we have a system that's fit for the future.
I think that's right, and I think there's one other thing I would add is that this comes down to data. We're going to this, you know, when you have millions of companies and you have criminals being able to use that size, that net, those the noise, if you like, to operate in. And it's all about really understanding who you're doing business with. We need beneficial ownership, not just as publicly. Of course, we need it publicly, but we need it as open data so that you can combine it with other data sets. You can combine it with sanctions list. You can combine it with your list. You can combine it with credit risk. You know, the bank can combine it to see if these businesses have got money going through them, suspicious transactions. It can't just be that left down to the regulators and the law enforcement, because they don't have the resources. It needs to be the system which solves this.
The system needs to work, and you're right, beneficial ownership data is critical, and it's not just about anti-money laundering and counter-terrorist financing. It's necessary for tax, and we need tax revenue now more than ever. It's necessary for good governance. If economies, if countries want to show that they're open to do business, they need to be open about what businesses are operating in their jurisdiction and who's behind them. And so this is a movement we need to continue to back.
Absolutely, and it's also important. I mean, my background is as a journalist, but I've been in the private sector running companies for quite some time. It's necessary for journalists, but it's also necessary for business, because every time that you do business with another company, you're exposing yourself to a risk. And if you don't know who that company is behind that company, then you can't take an informed view of that.
Absolutely.
It's been really fascinating, David. Thank you so much for your time.
It's great to speak, Chris. I look forward to having a longer conversation over lunch when all this COVID business is over. Great to speak to you.
Perfect. Thank you.
Bye.